The doorbell rang just as Mark tightened his tie. And Emily knew without a doubt that nothing after this moment would feel normal again. She stood in the kitchen, heart pounding, listening to his footsteps move toward the front door. The smell of roasted chicken filled the house, warm and familiar, but her thoughts were anything but calm. 10 minutes earlier, she had watched Mark smile in the mirror, confident and relaxed, completely unaware that this evening was not what he thought it was. Emily had invited Sarah. Mark believed it was a kind gesture, a friendly dinner, an old friend passing through town, nothing more. But Emily had not spent the entire night awake for nothing. 3 hours earlier, Emily sat alone at the kitchen table, scrolling through old photos she didn't mean to find. A life she used to believe in, a smile she used to recognize as her own. Somewhere along the way, her marriage had turned quiet, not broken, not loud, but distant. Mark still came home on time, still asked how her day was, still kissed her forehead before bed. But the connection, the warmth, the deep attention, it had slowly faded. Emily didn't blame him, and that scared her most, because when there is no clear fault, no clear fight, you begin to wonder if the problem is you. That's when she thought of Sarah. Sarah had once been close to Mark before Emily, before marriage, before this carefully built life. Emily had met her only twice, but the memory of her stayed sharp. She was kind, thoughtful, and had a way of making Mark laugh in a way Emily hadn't heard in years. The thought hurt, but it also woke something inside. Emily. She didn't invite Sarah out of jealousy. She invited her out of honesty. The door opened, and Mark's voice filled the hall. Sarah. Wow, it's been forever. Emily stepped out of the kitchen and saw her clearly for the first time in years. Sarah looked warm and familiar, dressed simply, her smile genuine. She carried a bottle of wine and a small gift, like someone who didn't want to take up too much space. Emily. Sarah said kindly, "Thank you for inviting me." Emily nodded, steady on the outside, racing on the inside. "I'm glad you came." They sat at the table, the three of them, under soft yellow lights. The conversation moved quickly. Jobs, travel, memories. Mark talked more than usual. Emily noticed that. He looked relaxed, animated, like someone remembering a version of himself he hadn't visited in a long time. Emily listened closely, saying little, watching everything. She noticed how Mark leaned back in his chair, how Sarah met his eyes without trying to impress him, how easily the past slipped into the room. It wasn't romantic. It wasn't inappropriate. But it was real, and Emily felt something shift inside her chest. Halfway through dinner, Mark excused himself to take a phone call from work. The room grew quiet. Emily and Sarah sat across from each other. The clink of silverware suddenly loud. Sarah broke the silence first. "You and Mark seem settled," she said gently. Emily smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "We are, in many ways." Sarah studied her carefully. "That pause, you don't have to explain it. I understand." Emily looked up, surprised. "Do you?" Sarah nodded. "People think love only ends when something goes wrong. Sometimes it just changes shape." Emily felt seen in a way she hadn't expected. She took a slow breath. "I invited you tonight because I needed to face something I've been avoiding." Sarah didn't interrupt. "I needed to know if I was holding on to a fear or a truth." Before Sarah could reply, Mark returned, cheerful again, unaware of the weight that had just settled between the two women. The rest of the dinner moved fast. Laughter returned, but it felt different now. Emily felt clearer, stronger. She wasn't watching for signs anymore. She was listening to her own heart. When dessert came, Emily stood to clear the plates. Her hands were steady. Her mind was not. This wasn't about Mark choosing her over Sarah. This was about Emily choosing herself as she walked back to the table. She realized something important. She hadn't invited Sarah to test her marriage. She invited her to test her silence. And for the first time in a long time, Emily knew this evening was just the beginning. The moment Sarah stepped into the living room, Emily felt the air shift, heavy with memories she hadn't touched in years. Mark's laughter greeted her first, warm and unsuspecting. And Emily's stomach twisted with a strange mix of anticipation and resolve. He thought tonight was a friendly reunion, a casual evening to reconnect with an old friend. But Emily knew better. This night wasn't about Mark. It was about her reclaiming the part of herself she had buried under routines and silent compromises. Dinner started smoothly, polite and light. Mark took the lead, animated and comfortable, telling stories that had everyone chuckling. Sarah laughed easily, her eyes meeting his in ways Emily remembered from old stories and forgotten anecdotes. It was effortless, natural, the kind of familiarity that could only exist between people who had shared time and trust. Emily sat quietly, observing. Every small gesture, every shared glance between them was like a spark in the dark, reminding her of the distance that had grown in her own marriage. But instead of jealousy, Emily felt clarity. She realized she hadn't invited Sarah to stir emotions in Mark, nor to see him react. She invited her to confront herself, to face the feelings she had pushed aside. As Mark poured wine for everyone, Emily noticed how easily he and Sarah slid into their old rhythm. It wasn't threatening. It was honest. And it illuminated a truth Emily had been avoiding. She had stopped speaking up about her needs, her desires, and her own heart. Sarah leaned forward, her voice soft but firm. "Emily, I can see it in your eyes. You're not here for Mark, are you?" Emily took a deep breath, surprised at how openly she could answer. "No," she admitted. "I'm here for me. I invited you because I needed to face something I've been avoiding for a long time." Mark frowned slightly, confusion knitting his brows. "What do you mean?" he asked. Emily looked at him, her gaze steady. "It's not about you, Mark. It's about me understanding what I've been holding on to. The silence, the waiting, the fear of asking for what I need." The words hung in the air, heavier than the aroma of roasted vegetables and dessert. Sarah's eyes softened, and she nodded slowly. "I understand," she said. "Sometimes we stay quiet, thinking it keeps the peace. But it only buries the truth deeper." Mark shifted uncomfortably, sensing a tension he couldn't quite name. Emily didn't rush to explain further. She let the moment breathe, letting both Sarah and Mark absorb the weight of what she was saying. She realized this was the first time in years she had spoken so openly about herself in the presence of someone who had been part of their shared past. Emily then turned to Sarah, her voice calmer but filled with intent. "I needed to know if I was holding on to fear or if I was holding on to the truth. I needed to see clearly what I wanted, not what I was afraid to ask for." Sarah smiled gently, a mix of pride and understanding. "You're braver than you know. Most people never get the chance to face themselves like this. It's not easy." Mark remained silent, processing the shift. He realized for the first time that Emily's quiet demeanor was not passive agreement or contentment. It was a thoughtful restraint, a patience that had hidden her feelings and her longing. And now that restraint was gone. She had claimed her voice, and he could see her in a way he hadn't in years. The rest of the dinner felt different. The conversation resumed, lighter now, but Emily noticed how her presence had changed the dynamic. She wasn't competing with Sarah. She wasn't trying to reclaim the past. Instead, she felt empowered, observing the ease of old friendships while recognizing her own place in the present. The clarity she had sought was not about choosing between people, was about choosing herself. When dessert was served, Sarah stood, preparing to leave. "I think this is my cue," she said quietly, her smile both warm and sad. She hugged Emily gently. "Thank you for inviting me. You're stronger than you realize and braver than you think." The door closed softly behind Sarah, leaving Emily and Mark alone in the quiet living room. The house felt different still, the same, yet lighter, somehow. Nothing had been fixed in the traditional sense. Nothing had been broken. But something essential had shifted. Emily turned to Mark, her voice steady and soft. "I didn't invite her for you, Mark. I invited her for me. I needed to remember that I have a voice, that I have needs, and that I deserve to ask for love and understanding openly." Mark stepped closer, his expression a mix of concern, realization, and admiration. I didn't realize, he admitted. I thought everything was fine because we were fine. I didn't see that you were struggling silently. Emily smiled faintly, feeling the weight lift slightly from her shoulders. We've been fine, but maybe fine wasn't enough. Maybe I needed to remind both of us that love isn't just about comfort. It's about attention, honesty, and presence. Mark reached for her hand, hesitating for a moment, then holding it with sincerity. I want to see you. Really see you. I want to be here for you, not just beside you. Emily felt a rush of relief mixed with hope. For the first time in months, she didn't feel alone in her own marriage. She realized that this evening wasn't about revisiting the past or comparing herself to someone else. It was about breaking silence, reclaiming courage, and creating space for honest connection. The night grew quiet, the soft glow of the living room lamps casting gentle shadows on the walls. Emily looked around the room at the home she shared with Mark, at the life they had built, and felt a sense of possibility. She hadn't invited Sarah to disrupt or test them. She had invited her to help herself confront a truth she had ignored for too long. And now, after the dinner, after the conversations, after the acknowledgement of feelings, Emily understood something crucial. Love isn't static. It isn't something that exists only in comfort or routine. It is shaped by courage, honesty, and the willingness to face uncomfortable truths. Mark finally broke the silence, his voice low and genuine. Thank you for being honest with me tonight. I know it wasn't easy. Emily squeezed his hand. It wasn't, but it needed to happen. And I'm not done yet, not with us, not with myself. Not with building a love that sees everything, not just what's convenient. He nodded slowly, and she felt a warmth that had been missing for months. A connection that wasn't loud or dramatic, but deep, real, and enduring. As they cleared the table together, Emily realized that this evening had done more than she had expected. She had faced the past, confronted her fears, and reclaimed her voice. And in doing so, she had opened a door not just for herself, but for the marriage she still cherished. She wasn't done asking for what she deserved. She wasn't done seeking clarity and understanding. And for the first time in a long time, she believed that real love could grow stronger, not just through comfort, but through courage, honesty, and the quiet strength of speaking her truth. The night ended without fanfare. There were no dramatic confessions or sweeping gestures. There were no fights, no tears, no ultimatums. Just Emily, Mark, and the quiet understanding that things could be different if they chose to see each other fully. Emily walked to the window, looking out at the stars above their quiet Connecticut neighborhood, and felt a calm determination settle in her heart. She had invited Sarah, not for Mark, but for herself. And now that she had seen clearly, she knew her journey with love both given and received was only beginning. The house was still. The night was gentle. And Emily at last felt alive in the presence of her own truth.